Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Welcome to the DMZ, everybody.
So Thursday morning, we are stuck in the middle of a fluid news cycle in regards to infrastructure reconciliation. But before we get there, we'll do our best. But before we get there, I want to talk Virginia, if that's okay with you.
Well, you got the election on Tuesday, so, and by the way, it's related. I think that maybe one of the reasons Biden wants to pass something, or at least claim that he's on the verge of passing something, is because of Virginia. That's one of the reasons.
Absolutely. And, you know, Liam Donovan, is he a lobbyist? Is he a lobbyist profession? I know he's got a podcast and he's a prolific tweeter, often giving very astute analysis. And he made the point on Twitter that it's probably not so much that McAuliffe wants Biden to pass the infrastructure bill. It's that Biden is worried that if McAuliffe loses, then they can't pass those bills. Right. They want to lock things in case McAuliffe does lose. But putting infrastructure to the side for the moment, I just wrote a piece last night. It hasn't been published yet. It still needs to be edited about, why is it that Glenn Youngkin has made this a competitive race? We don't know if he's going to win or not. But at minimum, he's made it more competitive than people thought he was going to, including myself. And you and I have talked about the role of critical race theory in Virginia, and I've been a skeptic. I was a skeptic early on that critical race theory would be that much of a boon to Republicans, because it wasn't. I didn't think it was going to be useful to getting back the college-educated suburbanites that got lost in places like Loudoun County, Virginia. And I think on the last show, I said, well, if Youngkin loses, maybe that means I'm proved wrong here. But I took a closer look. And I'm trying not to spin here and just, for self-serving reasons. I try to take an honest look at what's happened here. And I was particularly struck. There was a comment by a National Review reporter that, again, win or lose, this shows that Republicans should lean into critical race theory, transgender issues, anti-American curricula, that's what he said. Because it's because Youngkin has leaned into it, that's why the race got tight. When he was running a more traditional Republican campaign before, then it wasn't tight. And I don't think that's correct, because Youngkin took these stances. He was complaining with critical race theory and transgender issues in the schools back in the spring. You look at the Real Clear Politics average of the race, it's basically a 5-point race most of the year until October 1st. And then it starts to tick down. And when I checked yesterday, it was at 0.8. The steady decline is throughout the month of October. Well, what happened right before then? September 28th debate with McAuliffe and Youngkin. And Youngkin's talking about this issue with sexually explicit material in books that are in schools, particularly in school libraries, that when McAuliffe was governor became an issue, and a bill was passed to give parents an opt-out. I don't want this reading assignment. If this is going to be a reading assignment, tell me in advance, and I can make sure my kid doesn't get it for an assignment. And McAuliffe vetoed that bill. So McAuliffe, in response, I think we mentioned this before. I didn't fully appreciate the context. So in the course of his response, McAuliffe says, I don't think parents should get to tell schools what to teach. I mean, that's the gaffe. That's the moment. That's the quote that Youngkin has been drilling in his ads. That, to me, is the game changer. And that quote, when you cherry pick it, and when you look at Youngkin's ads, it stands on its own. There's no discussion of the broader context of what he was talking about. But he doesn't even mention sexually explicit material. He doesn't mention critical race theory. He doesn't mention transgender issues. It's just McAuliffe says that parents don't get a say in their kids' education. And depending on where you sit politically, you can interpret that as you wish. So that's your classic dog whistle. If you're hopped up on critical race theory and transgender, that's how you see it. But there are other things going on in schools that parents might say, I want to have a say on this or that. And McAuliffe thinks I should just sit back and let the school boards do what they want. Now, mind you, school boards are elected by the public. And so it's like school boards are wholly disconnected from parents, but Youngkin treats it like it's an us or them thing. And McAuliffe was not very deft at saying, hey, that's a false dichotomy. He fell into the trap. And you look at the Youngkin ads now. Here's some of the Youngkin ads. I'm sorry if I'm going on and on here, Matt. But
this is good stuff, Bill. This is good. This is why people come.
There's a lot in the Youngkin ad campaign about appealing to Democrats. He has several ads with a Democratic woman. I voted for Joe Biden. I'm a lifelong Democrat. But I think Youngkin is the person that can bring us together. He focuses on the issues that Virginians care about. There's one that's education specific, but does not mention critical race theory, transgender, any of that. It says our standards have been declining because politicians have put politics before kids. I mean, it's coming from someone who says they're a lifelong Democrat who voted for Joe Biden. So you wouldn't automatically run to the more right-wing critiques, which aren't mentioned in the ad. I think but Glenn Youngkin is running a Matt Lewis campaign. This is Reaganite. This is Smiley. This is Sunny. This is not Trumpian. This is not, I'm going to talk about, Trump would talk about critical race theory and just punch you in the face with it, you know? I mean, even when Youngkin's at a rally, like he's at a rally this past weekend, where he said, I would ban critical race theory in schools. But at the same time, he says, we have to teach the good and bad in American history. America's done great things, but it's also done some abhorrent things. We need to teach all of it. But I would ban critical race theory. So there's that signal there to the more moderate voter, to even a left-leaning voter. He has an ad, again, that has the McAuliffe clip where Youngkin's speaking to the camera. And he ends that ad by saying, I want to increase teacher pay and pass the largest education budget in Virginia history. That's not a conservative message. That's a progressive message. So there's a lot of reaching out across the aisle in the ad campaign with the dog whistle stuff. You know, it's not like you're not paying attention to the base at all. But it's not, the model is not Trumpian, in my opinion. And it's a harder target for McAuliffe to hit back with, especially when he made such a glaring gaffe. So that's my spiel on why I think this case has gone the way it has.
I think you're right. I agree with everything that you've said. The only thing I would say, sort of, and this is more of a subtle difference, nuanced difference, but the only thing I would say differently is I do think that the line that the Terry McAuliffe gaffe about, I'm not going to let parents have a say or tell us what to teach is part of a larger culture war effort. I think that there's overlap with the trans gender fluid bathroom controversy. I think there's overlap with the critical race theory thing. And I also think that it was maybe a forced mistake that McAuliffe made, that is the product of Youngkin talking about cultural issues that put McAuliffe on the defensive and ultimately led him to make this gaffe, which I agree with you is really the difference maker. That's the biggest moment so far, I think, of this race, is that. So I guess the only thing I would say is I think you're right that, critical race theory has gotten a lot of ink, probably hasn't moved the needle as much as this gaffe that McAuliffe made, but I see them as being somewhat interrelated.
Well, I agree with that. I mean, but look at the order of events. You stoke the base with critical race theory and transgender earlier in the race. That gets them hopped up, but it doesn't get you over 50%. Then your opponent makes a gaffe. You exploit the gaffe, But when you exploit it, you sand down the rough edges of the conservative pitch. You leave a lot of that stuff
modern Bailey, I guess, is the technique or something.
I'm not familiar with that phrase.
Okay, we can Google it, but I think it has to do with. I mean, it's similar. It's where you basically, it would be where you like say something outrageous, kind of to get a reaction, and then you. Well, I'm not really saying that. You know what I mean? This would be a similar sort of technique.
I think there's an element of that.
I don't necessarily think that Youngkin did this. Like, I don't know that this is all like a master plan, though.
Well, you couldn't know he was going to gaffe like that.
Yeah.
But he was sophisticated enough to know that when the gaffe happened and he had to move quickly to take advantage of it, he did it in a way with a clear eye towards the middle of the state and didn't just, bathe himself in right-wing talking points. I mean, the most, the edgiest ad I've seen him do, which is a straight attack ad. There's no comparative, there's no positive for Youngkin. It's just a negative on McAuliffe. Which again uses that quote. It has a female narrator, and it talks about liberal left bureaucrats have taken over our schools, and then talks about declining standards and violence in the schools. And there's a shot of video footage of an incident that happened at a school last month. There was a brawl that involved 13 kids, and 20 police officers had to come and break it up. But again, what the brawl was about isn't stated. And the article I read was about a girl. That's all I saw in the article. It's not even about transgender, it's not about race or anything like that.
It's always about a girl.
Right.
At the end of the day, it's somebody. There's a fight, and oftentimes Helen of Troy. I'm just going to say it.
Now, again, this is happening at the same time that there is this incident that occurred in June of a sexual assault in a girl's bathroom at a school. Mm-hmm. And the boy was wearing a skirt, and this was part of a instance where there was a raucous school board meeting. I think about transgender issues generally, and these loud school board meetings have gotten really out of hand. They get packed. People are. I mean, I saw the video. They're being disruptive. They're talking over the school board members. They're waving signs, and the school board basically like, we can't have this meeting. You can't let us meet. I'm not sure if they adjourned into executive session or what, but they kind of cut off public comment, and then all hell broke loose. And this one parent got arrested, but he's the parent whose daughter was sexually assaulted. So obviously he's got a legit grievance.
Yeah, and by the way, everything you said was correct, but one other point, I believe that the superintendent of schools at that meeting was asked, "Have there been any assaults in bathrooms?" And said no.
Right. So
and I can understand why that parent. Yeah.
Right. So that set that parent off, understandably. Yeah. Now I didn't hear that part of the meeting, so I can't tell you exactly the words or the question. I know what the superintendent said afterwards. He was saying, I was referring to transgender people involved in an assault, because even though this boy was wearing a skirt, all the accounts are that it's a boy. It's not a boy saying he was a girl or saying he was transgender.
Some people have alleged that the boy is gender fluid, but I don't think that's been substantiated. I will say this, though. Even regardless of where you stand on the trans issue, I mean, you could certainly make an argument that, like, allowing, if all it takes for a boy to go into a girl's bathroom is donning a skirt, that would potentially increase the likelihood that you could have either consensual sex taking place in bathrooms unsupervised or non-consensual sex taking place in bathrooms. And so, in a way, it's irrelevant whether it was a trans issue.
I would disagree with that. But I agree that those are the dots that people are trying to connect. But so this boy apparently, boy's 14, so we don't have names. People aren't being interviewed publicly so much. But the boy was actually found guilty in a court proceeding this past week, and in the documentation that has been seen, this was a boy and a girl who had consensual sexual encounters in girls' bathrooms previously, and had a planned rendezvous in this bathroom. I'm not saying the boy shouldn't be found guilty. It seems like what happened that it was non-consensual. But the insinuation this whole time has been someone was trans or pretending to be trans and like hid in a bathroom and then attacked somebody. Like that's not what happened here. So in any event,
but by the same token, I agree with everything you said. But I would also say, if you had a old-fashioned hardline prohibition on men going or boys going into the girls' bathroom, then it may be less likely that those encounters, whether consensual or not, would take place. And the amazing thing in the Washington Post bill, I guess it was from the court proceedings, is this boy claims that can we call it alleged rape? I guess he's been convicted. I don't know, but
so he's found guilty of some form of sexual assault. I don't know exactly what the particulars were.
And I'm reading between the lines in this Washington Post story, but he claimed that his watch got caught on his skirt, and so there was an accidental.
Well, that's what he was arguing, but he was found guilty. So I'm not going to take that literally.
Oops.
But I think what you're saying, Matt, I think is conjecture. We don't have statistics to know, the number of times there have been school-based sexual assaults in a bathroom, how often they happen before there were gender-neutral bathrooms. Actually, I don't even think there was a gender-neutral policy implemented in the school yet. There was a plan to have it happen, but it hadn't even been implemented. That's my understanding.
Yeah.
So, but my broader point here is, beyond the specifics of this case, this issue has been in the media bloodstream. And so when you have an ad that talks about violence in the schools, it doesn't have to mention that specific incident. In fact, the incident that I mentioned was a wholly different incident. But someone might, if you're familiar with it, would connect those dots without the Youngkin campaign having to spell it out for you. So that's where the dog whistle stuff comes into play. So even when there's an ad that's harder edged, even when it's talking about left liberal bureaucrats, which is a bit more conservative friendly messaging, they're still pulling back on explicitly talking about critical race theory and transgender issues in the ad campaign.
Yeah. And one thing I want to say, because I think it's important for the listeners to understand, because Trump messed everything up, right? And so you had a lot of people like me and a lot of people in Northern Virginia and the suburbs who didn't vote for Republicans the last 6 years or something like that. But a lot of these issues, these culture war issues, would appeal to someone like me. And if the election were held today, like, I probably would vote for Youngkin if I were a Virginia resident. So this is an example of how I think Trump, or how the Republican Party can sort of use some of these culture issues that Trump helped popularize without Trump. In a way, they're arguably more effective without Trump. Like someone like Youngkin is arguably a better messenger of them and than Trump would be. In a state like Virginia, which is like purple or maybe even trending blue, Youngkin is a better spokesman for the culture war because he can play it much better and attract people like me who are sympathetic to the conservative cultural appeal, but not turned off by Trump's kind of vulgarity and illiberalism. And I think there's an argument that if Youngkin wins, there's an argument that it's bad for the country, because what it means is that Republicans have learned that they don't have to confront the big lie and that they don't have to sort of confront January 6th, that they can just kind of move past it. And that could be a bad thing. I think there's an argument that that's a good thing, right? That you're never going to get them to actually cop to it. But if they can kind of muddle through and survive post-Trump and maybe transcend Trump, that eventually things shake out. It's never going to be Reagan's, party again, but maybe it could be like a saner but more populist party. But
Reagan had his winks and nods too. I mean, it's not like Reagan never, employed any dog whistles in his day. There are plenty of unsavory elements on the far right that Reagan had to navigate.
I don't want to get into Reagan, but let me say this: Trump is this is where I was going with this. Trump is now teasing the possibility that he may do a rally in Virginia. And if Trump does a rally in Virginia, I mean, that could blow up the whole race for Youngkin potentially, right?
I based on my read of his messaging and the image he's trying to put out there, I would think Youngkin would not want Trump to do that.
Yes.
I mean, I haven't seen anything in the past 12 hours. I thought I saw that Trump wasn't going to go there, but maybe that there's something that's still being discussed or it's up in the air.
Well, I think Trump put out a cryptic statement, and some of his people have put out ambiguous tweets, and it's unclear if he's sort of just trolling for attention or if he's really going to do this. Maybe he thinks Youngkin's going to win and he wants to come in and claim credit. Because if Youngkin wins while sort of distancing from Trump, then the scenario I laid out becomes more likely that they could sort of, look, here's what's going to happen if Trump's not careful. Because, and again, Trump has the benefit of sort of, he's not a lame duck in the sense that he can tease or possibly even run again in 2024. But at some point, all these people that Trump elevated become competition to him. Tucker Carlson, Dan Bongino. I mean, there are a lot of younger people out there who are going to be, in a sense, competition for eyeballs and attention in the attention campaign to Trump. So he's not going to be able to sustain, forever. And if someone like Youngkin is able to win by like not going all in on Trump, that's probably not great for Trump.
I would just think, Youngkin's got momentum. If Trump went in there, he's at risk of being blamed for killing the momentum. Whereas if he stayed out of it, he can just swoop in and try to claim credit after the fact. Like, why insert yourself when
you're thinking rationally. He believes that he always wins. He can do no wrong, and that if he goes in there, people are going to love him and they'll vote for Youngkin, and he'll. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think he can make a rational analysis like you just did.
I just want to circle back to what you said about culture war, because I think what Youngkin is doing here is trying to suggest that he is going to end the culture war. Not that he's going to wage culture war. They want to say the Democrats are playing culture war, and he wants to bring people together. He was on Fox in late May with Ben Dominique. Am I pronouncing the last name right?
It's nobody knows. I've known Ben Dominic or whatever for 20 years, and I don't even know.
Maybe it's Dominic. And Ben was trying. This was right when critical race theory and transgender stuff was cropping up. And Ben was trying to be like, sounds like you're running a campaign that's really embracing these culture war issues. You're not running these, Chamber of Commerce, all economic Republican campaigns, right? And then Youngkin would very carefully respond that, say, Democrats are waging culture war in our schools. He wouldn't say he was going to wage culture war. And again, he's got ads now saying you Democrats are going to bring people together. He's got one. It was I think it was just a social media ad with a Democrat saying, "I really think the country needs healing after January 6th, and Glenn Youngkin can do that." So it's not like he's leaning into January 6th insurrection. There was this incident where there was a rally that had a lot of Trump supporters, and someone was waving a January 6th insurrectionist flag. And Youngkin said, "I think that flag is weird and wrong." And he's not trying to wrap himself up in that talk. But at the same time, he still wants their votes. He doesn't want them to go away.
I hear your point. And I guess what I would say to that is a couple of things. Like, one, I do think the Youngkin version of the culture war is more positive and more probably more Reagan-esque certainly than Trump. And I don't think that culture wars are stupid or irrelevant. I mean, I think that there are legitimate issues happening with the left right now that are outrageous. And I don't blame conservatives for talking about it. I guess what I'm saying is that I think that Youngkin is acknowledging that what moves the needle now is not talking about, tax rates or the highway spending on 495.
He does have tax ads, though. There are ads running now.
Sure.
Him a call on taxes. That's part of the mix.
Yeah, and there's a way to make taxes part of the culture war. I guess what I'm saying is that he's not running, even though I think Youngkin is by nature kind of a wonky establishment type guy who might love to talk about, tax rates and stuff like that in a wonky way. I think he's acknowledging that what works is the culture war issues and cultural issues that are much deeper, much more deep-seated and having to do. Now, he wants to say, and I agree with him, that the left started the culture war. I think the left is on offense in the culture wars, and conservatives are playing defense, right? And trying to conserve the way things used to be in many cases.
Some people in Texas might disagree, but go on.
It's still the culture. I mean, I think he's at least acknowledging that what is going to move the needle are cultural issues, regardless of who started it, and regardless of what kind of optimistic or happy face you put on it. It's a cultural war.
So let's shift to what's going on with infrastructure. And again, we're at 10:45 in the morning on Thursday. Biden has had his meeting with the
strategically timed.
Right.
Strategically timed to be the worst possible time to have this conversation.
So I'm just seeing that Pelosi has called for the vote. Whip Jim Clyburn is whipping, and I'm just seeing Jayapal, the Congressional Progressive Caucus, asked if a vote is possible. Quote, logistically it's possible, but I don't think we have the votes for it, unquote. So the question really is now, and again, maybe by the time you hear this, the answer will be known. Up until this point, the Congressional Progressive Caucus stance has been, we're not going to vote for the bipartisan infrastructure bill until we have the reconciliation bill passed in the Senate. Sometimes there's been a little give on that maybe the legislative text would be enough. That there's a final agreement. Jayapal said a framework agreement's not enough. We want to see the text. If it was going to be one vote, then the other one right away, that would be okay. But essentially, for all intents and purposes, that they be linked. And in that strategy, I think they've always had, either explicitly or implicitly, support from Biden and Pelosi. It wasn't the Progressive Caucus on their own being the resistance. So today is the first day when both Biden and Pelosi are no longer giving them that fortification. And so if they're going to block this bill, and maybe they will, I'm not going to make a prediction on that, but they're doing it on their own, they would have to own that decision when the Democratic leadership is now unanimous in saying, hey, look, we pushed as hard as we could here. We have a framework. Now, mind you, the other element here is they have a framework that apparently Manchin and Sinema have agreed to. It doesn't have all the T's crossed, but it has a top line of $1.75 trillion. The basic elements are in there. A good number of things have been dropped that progressives wanted. So it's by no means everything progressives wanted. I'd say this leans more towards a fewer things, longer time frames bill than a everything on short time frames bill that the progressives wanted, because they want to get the camel's nose in the tent. They're not getting as much of that. So on one hand, you might say, well, progressives will be unhappy with how this played out, and therefore they're less inclined to come along. But I think it also shows that the strategy to date, let's hold the infrastructure bill hostage so we have more leverage in the broader bill, that tactic did not work. They did not get great leverage over that bill. Manchin and Sinema still called the shots. And the best thing you can do to spin it for yourself on the progressive side is, well, at least we got something. We thought they were going to kill the whole thing, and we ensured that they gave us something. So again, I'm not predicting how it's all going to go out from here because I think it's way too fluid. But this is a different set of dynamics and factors than we had a month ago, and it requires a lot more gumption on the progressives' part to be the singular reason why this deal falls apart, and their ability to play that role has not been tested until today.
So in about 40 minutes, Bill, Joe Biden is supposed to talk
publicly.
I think he's given a speech today.
Okay.
And I wonder how much of this is fake it till you make it. If because he's going to where is he going? He's going abroad to a climate meeting or conference.
So just I'm seeing on Twitter right now, Congressman Connolly. This is Connolly's phrasing of Biden. Translation: I'm going to Rome. I want to get off that plane and disprove Putin and Xi, who say democracies can't get anything done. I'd like to have something at hand to disprove that. Translation: pass the infrastructure bill. Whereas Jayapal is saying Biden did not ask for a vote on the BIF today. The speaker did, but he did not. He says he wants votes on both bills. So they're interpreting it slightly differently. And Jake Sherwin at Punchbowl News said Biden's scheduled to land at Rome at 8:10 p.m. DC time. So he's essentially putting that time frame on that. So Jai was like, well, he's saying both bills. Well, obviously you're not going to pass both bills by 8:10 p.m. He's saying he wants to walk off that plane with a bill in hand. I think the more obvious connection to draw is he's saying pass the infrastructure bill by 8:10 p.m.
Well, look, Bill, we probably shouldn't talk too much longer because by the time this airs, things are going to really change. I think the only thing I would say is I feel like this is a really high stakes game he's playing. This may be a consequential day in the presidency of Joe Biden. It seems like a big day. It seems like he's really raising the stakes, and I feels like it may or may not come together. I don't think it's obvious. It's really not obvious to me that this is going to work out. Like I feel like maybe it will, maybe it won't. But maybe he has gotten to the point now where it's he's just going to put it on the table and let the chips fall where they may.
I said very early on, way before a lot of this drama came to be. I can't remember when I wrote the piece, but I think it was in the summer. Just talking generally about who has the better leverage in these kinds of situations, and as a general rule, it's really hard to say no when your president gets you on the phone and says, "My presidency is at stake here." Now, I don't know how many phone calls Biden's going to make today. But I do think that seems to be the implication of what he is saying today. And certain people can withstand that. Joe Manchin, in a state that Trump won going away, can more easily say, I don't care if it's for your presidency or not. My fate isn't intertwined with yours. I've heard some people argue that progressives in deep blue districts, they're not afraid of primary challenges. And so they might feel insulated from that kind of pressure too, and be more willing to stand their ground. And look, I think in AOC or Cori Bush or Jamal Bowman, they may have ideological beliefs that transcend Biden's fate and transcend the Democratic Party's fate that make them less likely to be susceptible to that kind of pressure. But I think the vast majority of Democrats across the ideological spectrum see that their fates are intertwined, that if Biden falls, they all fall. The midterms will be a disaster. They got to get some points on the board. And if Biden is saying to you credibly, we're all cooked here unless we do this, that's going to make a lot of people, straight in their spines. And again, and there's an unknown factor here. We still don't know how many Republicans might actually vote for this thing. It's not being talked about very much. Again, I don't expect it to be a lot, but single digit numbers might matter here, depending on how many progressives break away from the squad and decide they're going to vote yes on this thing.
All right, I have to go watch this. This is one of the few times I'm literally interested. Sometimes I watch these things because I have to. This time I actually want to know what's going to happen. This is high stakes, man.
I think it's genuine drama, genuine uncertain outcome, and it involves leaders essentially. I think a lot of times you assume, well, they're not going to do this unless they know the votes are in hand. They probably don't know the votes are in hand right now. They have to get the votes. And a lot of times, I think the determination is we can't get the votes until we put the squeeze on. People are going to sit on the fence until we make them get off the fence. Yeah. And they weren't willing to do that in September. But I think they feel like, look, we've shown how far Manchin and Sinema are willing to go, and there's no other place for the rest of us to go but forward on this bill now. Time to get off the fence.
I think my lead's going to be leap and the net will appear. They hope. That's not bad, right?
We'll wordsmith it. We'll fix it.
All right. Good show. Follow us on Twitter at DMZ Show. Bill, anything you want to promote?
I did have a piece in the monthly earlier this week, also Virginia, about the issue with teachers wanting to not call transgender students by their preferred pronouns, and the ACLU siding with transgender student rights, and Glenn Greenwald criticizing the ACLU for doing that. I defended the ACLU in that dispute. So that piece is up at the monthly. And I take a look out for my Youngkin piece, which should be coming out, later, if not this week. I think no later than Monday before the Tuesday election. Are we going to Zoom tomorrow or not?
Let's talk about it.
All right.
Let's talk about it offline. Okay. If we do, I expect we should do a costume Zoom. Cost Zoom. Always read my stuff at the Daily Beast. Check out 2 videos this week. I interviewed at my YouTube page Stephen Hayes of The Dispatch. Had a great conversation with him. And Victor Davis Hanson about his new book, The Dying Citizen, up on my YouTube page as well, youtube.com/Matt Lewis. And we'll see you back here in the DMZ.
All right. Take care.
Thanks.